I'm Elia Einhorn. Welcome to a very special edition of Talkhouse, featuring the second episode of the McIntosh For the Love of Music podcast. In this series, we explore the history of legendary American audio gear maker McIntosh Laboratory through conversations with renowned musicians and audio professionals. McIntosh has been hand-building the very best audio equipment in Binghamton, New York for over 70 years. Not only did they help create the hi-fi industry, they have forever changed how we listen to music. Even if you've never heard the name McIntosh, you've definitely seen their gear, with its iconic blue watt meters and green glowing logo. It's been featured in numerous blockbuster movies, including The Departed, Ocean's 8, John Wick 3, and Knives Out, to name a few, along with hit TV shows like Elementary, Marin, and Law & Order. Anyone who watched Season 2 of Mr. Robot would have seen the incredible World of McIntosh townhouse in Manhattan, which in the show serves as the headquarters for Rami Malek and Carly Chaikin's characters. LCD Sound System's James Murphy has even created a custom DJ system called Despacio using over 35 McIntosh amplifiers. And their products can be found in the homes of many famous and influential musicians, both past and present. In the inaugural episode of this series, I caught up with former Grateful Dead electronics outfitter and renowned music gear creator Janet Furman. For today's show, I got the chance to go deep with Third Man Records co-owner, official White Stripes archivist, and drummer of revered garage rockers the Dirtbombs, Ben Blackwell. Ben has lived in the music industry from an early age. He began working for his uncle Jack White's band, the White Stripes, as a teen. And in 2009, White, Blackwell, and another Detroit pal, Ben Swank, opened Third Man Records in Nashville. The label, whose motto is, "Your turntable's not dead," has become one of the world's finest purveyors of both new albums and deluxe reissues on vinyl. Their HQ in Nashville is truly incredible and includes a stacked record and audio gear store, a live venue outfitted to record shows direct to acetate, a dark room, an editing bay, and a massive warehouse filled with books, band merch, and all manner of music ephemera. Keep it locked to hear about the founding of Third Man, how the label's incredible reissues are dreamt up and brought to life, Neil Young pulling Ben away from his work, and so much more. Check it out. Ben Blackwell, welcome to For the Love of Music.
Thanks for putting a gun to my head and making me be here. I didn't have a choice.
Well, listen, man, to kick things off, could you tell us about the various hats that you wear at Third Man? Because you seem to be working in like 15 areas at once.
Yeah. When we started out at Third Man, there was this directive that no official job titles, that job titles are inherently limiting, and that it's more often used for someone to say, I'm not going to do that because I am, what's the Rolling Stones line, under assistant West Coast promotions man. I don't do those things. But with Jack's thought process, it was everyone should do everything, you know? And when we started, there was only 2 people here, so it was kind of more just out of necessity than anything else. But as it stands today, I kind of oversee all of our vinyl operations. So that's manufacturing in our plant up in Detroit, what we're making, where we're making it, how we're making it, mastering. My world is vinyl records, by and by.
And Ben, I understand you also do a lot of the sourcing of the tapes.
Yeah, I do a lot of reissues or archival releases, maybe old recordings that had never been put out originally. I tend to think I work better with dead artists than living ones. No, that's being pretty flippant about it. But yeah, I that's just, I guess, where my brain lays. I think more about that stuff than new recordings and new artists. I feel out of touch in that regard. And I'm probably more in touch than most people, but the people that I'm surrounded by, I'm probably out of touch.
It's all relative, right?
Yeah, you surround yourself with experts, that kind of thing. So I am not the expert on new music.
Well, a couple of things that I adore about Third Man's aesthetic is the way that the deepest attention is paid to detail and the small, handcrafted batch mentality that seems to inform all of your projects. Now, you've been with Third Man from the very beginning. What's the genesis of those philosophies in the company?
Man, I don't know if it was necessarily planned out, if it was the idea that here's exactly how we're going to do it and this is the vibe we're going to put out. We just kind of went on instinct. So for me, instinctively, I had been working in vinyl record business for maybe about 10 years prior, give or take. I started at this small Detroit indie label called Italy Records. And Italy put out the first 2 White Stripes singles. And once confronted with that operation, working for the White Stripes, seeing how Dave Buick ran that label, Italy, I was completely enamored. He just ran it out of his front room of his house in Detroit. And it was all, you fold the singles in your front room while you're watching TV, and you pack up the mail orders and you send it out. And every once in a while you'll call a distributor and see if they're dumb enough to buy multiple copies.
I love it. Full DIY.
Kind of rinse, repeat, all that shit. And then after a couple of years of doing that with Dave, I'd started my own label when I was 20 years old out of my high school childhood bedroom, doing the same thing, mainly doing 7-inch singles, mail order, distributors when they were gullible. And so that was kind of what informed Third Man. You know, we do a lot of 7-inch singles when most labels don't. We placed a high priority on direct-to-customer mail order when a lot of labels don't. And, you know, that direct-to-customer mail order has been really, really good for us in the past 5 months because people on a large extent have stopped shopping as much at physical record stores, but they still want music. And so we send it right to them. Our mail order remained really, really strong through all the pandemic. The guys down there said it was like 3 months of Christmas shopping.
True story. Before this interview today, Ben, I placed an order at that exact store for an issue of your magazine, Maggot Brain, and the full Franz Gall reissue collection.
My children's college fund thanks you.
Well, tell me, man, in a time where there's so many newer technologies, what is it about doing things those old time-tested ways that really appeals to you guys?
I think time-tested, you landed right on it, that it can be scary being an early adopter of anything, of a piece of equipment or of a technology or of a idea. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what we appreciate and what we value here at Third Man in terms of art and creativity, you know, we're not talking about cave paintings at Lascaux. You know, how would you make a cave painting in that manner now? No, you can still get a nice Fender Twin Reverb amp. You don't need to be wasting your effort on plugins and digital emulators and things of that nature. It's not necessarily the easiest way. And that kind of harkens back to this line that Jack has said forever, talking about the White Stripes. He said, I didn't want to take the easy way out.
Right.
I didn't want to play the brand new out-of-the-box guitar that just stayed in tune. I wanted to struggle. I wanted to fight. I wanted to have to work against something. And so a little bit of that bakes into the idea of, you know, we're selling vinyl records. That's not the easiest thing, you know, especially when you think back when we started in 2009. Everyone would have just said, well, why aren't, you know, you need to make everything available on iTunes and CDs. That's how you're going to make money in the record business in this day. It's like, we'll do that as like our third and fourth ideas down the line, but no, we love vinyl records. All of our favorite music has always been on vinyl records. That's what I know. That's what I was doing in the late 90s, and it wasn't because it was cool, or it wasn't because everyone thought it was cool. It was because I thought it was cool.
Right.
There was no larger public vinyl is back narrative going on.
It would be some years before that kicked in.
Yeah, probably about 10 years. So it was true underground, and it was affordable. You could do it cheaply. It was still cheaper to make a vinyl record than a CD. And so, you know, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but it's because of people like myself working for Italy Records putting out vinyl, and underground labels, independent labels like Sub Pop, Matador, In the Red Records, Estrus, et cetera, labels like that kept everything going, that drove the narrative that, oh, vinyl is coming back. Look at all these cool underground labels that are doing it, and they're doing cool, interesting shit. And that further upstreams into larger major labels who never stopped making vinyl, but they definitely curtailed it for a long time.
And all of a sudden, Urban Outfitters has a vinyl section and has become the biggest vinyl retailer in the States for a while.
Yeah, and so in some regard, when things like that happen, or you see people, they're giving away record players as prizes on The Price is Right, things like that. You see vinyl in Target. For a while, we're just like, that is what it is. But after years and years of that, I'm like, man, that's probably because of us. That's the effort that we put into all of this. We helped elevate this to a larger consciousness. And people will call bullshit on me, and screw them. They didn't do it.
You've been in the trenches, man.
Yeah.
You have been in the trenches.
Yes.
Well, Ben, we've heard that Jack White requested there be McIntosh equipment at Third Man HQ. What McIntosh equipment do you all have over there?
Ooh, so we've got a couple different setups, and we've got a couple different locations. So, for example, our storefront in Detroit, all of the in-house, music you hear pumping through the speakers, that's all through a McIntosh system.
Nice.
And then in our general kind of hangout lounge here at Third Man is another McIntosh system. But it's a McIntosh amp and a couple other components. I think there's a CD player in there. But then like the badass system is in Jack's office, which is McIntosh, monoblock, huge ass receiver, just totally decked out. And
nice.
It's dangerous. Like I will say it's dangerous because we'll listen to that stuff really, really loud, and it definitely spoils you being able to hear things that well. So I have to pick and choose when I will actually make the effort to listen to something under those circumstances, because I don't want to be totally spoiled.
So you're not checking every test pressing on McIntosh equipment?
No, it probably only makes sense to listen to a test pressing on the McIntosh system once I've listened to it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Like once something's approved or kind of dealt with. Because the McIntosh, it makes records sound too good. And that's not what I
Totally.
want when I'm listening to a test pressing. I kind of need to take into context the wide range of what people will be listening to these records on when they buy them and take them home. So you have to consider like 1960s Fisher-Price Big Bird, portable record player all the way up to these crazy McIntosh systems. And so I've never had a record not sound good on that system. The McIntosh, top of the line, badass, monoblock, the glowing blue lights.
I'm drooling.
Yeah, me too. Good thing this microphone has that pop thing over it. But so I kind of have to find like this middle ground. I use a Audio-Technica AT-LP 120, which is basically a Technics 1200 clone, but super affordable. And I like the idea that it has all three speeds, so you can do 33, 45, or 78. And it also has push button stop and reverse. So that to me is really, really valuable when I'm listening to a test pressing, because if I hear a pop or I hear something like, whoa, wait a minute, and I want to go back to it, I just press a button and its push button will just start rewinding.
Nice.
And I can kind of ride it back and forth. Like, do I still hear that pop? What's going on?
You don't need the DJ spin out.
No, I don't. And that can be difficult too. If you hear something and trying to find the exact spot, without the reverse, you'd be pressing start, stop button, and then you'd have to cue back counterclockwise to try to find it. And, why use your hands if there's a button that will do it, But I think the LP120 is maybe not necessarily an industry standard, but I don't think anyone argues with it and thinks that it's a bad idea. So I got to kind of toe the line. I can't be super hi-fi and I can't be super lo-fi. I have to be kind of in the middle.
Yeah, no, it's good to be testing across grades. Yeah.
Yeah, so it helps that there's at least two other setups here in the office that I can, let me go check it out in the lounge, which is got the badass McIntosh.
I've been in the lounge there. It does sound awesome.
Yes, and then I can also let me really listen to it in Jack's office, and that's a rarefied occasion, and I would say that's celebratory.
Nice, man. Champagne and McIntosh.
Yeah.
Well, this sort of leads me into something that I wanted to ask you, man, which is how you feel that music listening habits of today have influenced listeners, musicians, and equipment manufacturers, right? So I'm thinking of things like streaming music, wireless listening, things like that. What's your take?
Wow. That is I don't know if I've ever considered that before. I guess I would say that, to use Techniques as an example, they stopped making the 1200, their signature turntable, probably the most recognizable turntable of all time. I think they stopped making it in 2009, 2012, maybe somewhere around there.
Okay.
Kind of right when things started to take off, vinyl resurgence-wise. And whatever, not 6-7 years later, they're like, we're bringing it back.
I'm surprised it took them that long.
Yeah, and there's no shortage of them out there either. It was kind of the default go-to DJ turntable.
I've got one for when I spin.
Yeah, exactly. For years and years, that you could always find secondhand ones, and there was definitely availability of replacement parts. You could get them serviced really easily, which is something that is beneficial to have a component like that.
Sure.
So I think of that, but then also the fact that you can find a record player at Target or Urban Outfitters. For the longest time when I was younger, in my, Detroit borderline of the suburbs upbringing, to find a new record player was almost impossible.
Yeah, you almost had to mail order it at that point.
Yeah, but also when I'm 16, I don't know, mail order a turntable. So for me, it was always you just go to the Salvation Army, and it was the great time to be doing that because the Salvation Army would be littered with these turntables that people were getting rid of in the mid-90s. That's probably about the time that a lot of people were tapping out there.
Yeah, going to CDs.
Yeah, so I don't think I had a new record player. God damn.
Till this summer.
I think I had a new one. I was probably already at Third Man. I was probably in my 30s. I had bought new portables. Like Vestax had a cool line of portables I don't think they make anymore that were great for digging.
Nice.
And all kind of packed up like a little suitcase. And I would take it with me on tour. I would take it with the idea of being able to listen to records at record stores and check them out. But then I would also bring records with me, and that served as my personal Walkman. So I'd be sitting, there's somewhere out there's a picture of me in an airplane with the tray table down, with my portable turntable sitting on the tray table, spinning like a Yeah Yeah's picture disc LP or something.
Yes.
Like 2004 or whatever. I love it, man. I'm proud of it, and it's also, it's a little bit, I was too dedicated. That's all I can say.
This is why you co-founded Third Man,
Exactly. That's how you have to be.
This is the vinyl fetishization that was needed to found the empire, man. Ben, tell me, how do you all at the label make sure that each release is up to your standards? I know that you guys are digging through a lot of historic releases that maybe haven't been taken care of, maybe aren't as clean as we'd be used to nowadays.
Yeah.
So how do you guys make sure that you're able to keep that consistency?
You have to view every release individually in regards to what is available to you. So for things that we're involved in creating, i.e. Jack White related projects done at his studio, the genesis starts here at Third Man. That's kind of the easiest one because we know from the first note recorded, we have control over all of that. And so that generally means, recorded to 2-inch tape, mixed to 1-inch tape, cut from that 1-inch tape direct to disc. Oftentimes, not always, digitally mastered from that 1-inch tape. That's easy. We've set that up. We've instituted that. But when you start reissuing stuff and you're dealing with licensing titles from other labels, you're then at the whims of what that label thought was important 30 years ago, or what they thought was garbage 30 years ago, what they kept, what they forgot. And it's a crapshoot. My favorite one was we did reissues of the Melvins 3 Atlantic LPs, their major label LPs. So it's...
Oh man, classics.
Yeah, so Houdini, Stoner Witch, and Stag.
Total classics.
And we worked with the Melvins to do it. The Melvins had, in short, been told that they would never be able to get those records reissued by some lackey at Warner Brothers or something like that. And I said, well, I know some people over there, let me make a phone call. Because we had just recorded a live record by the Melvins here at Third Man in Nashville. And, talked to the right people at Warner Brothers, and they're like, yeah, we'll let Third Man do it. That sounds cool. And the Melvins were kind of like, really? Like, you just made one call and it happened? I guess,
Nice.
They like us over there. And so in the process of getting everything working together, you got to make deals with their reissues department. And we hadn't really done too much of that at that point. But pretty far in the process, I said, if you guys have the original analog reels, I want to cut from those. Like, I don't want to just be given a digital master. And whomever I was dealing with at the time was like, well, that's, I can't guarantee that my bosses are going to approve that. Someone's got to sign off on it. And, I can't guarantee that we even have, all that stuff. And it's going to delay this process if it does circle around like that.
But you're thinking let's wait a little bit. If we can
whatever,
get it from the original tapes, that's the highest quality.
Yeah, these records haven't been out in 20 years already. What's another 6 months? No one knows we're doing this. No one's waiting on it in terms of the public. As you announce that shit after you've already pressed it.
Right.
And like super quick. Like, oh yeah, you signed off. They approve it, and they sent down the original reels of all those records. And it was pretty awesome because our cutting engineer at that time we were primarily using a guy named George Ingram at Nashville Record Productions here in town. Been cutting records since the late 60s. Just an amazing wealth of information. He's cut tens of thousands of records over his life. You don't really get too much out of him in regards to, the material. He gets the job done. But to hear him unsolicited say, they recorded these albums really, really well.
Oh, man.
To hear that from him, it's like, oh man, that makes me feel really good that we got the tapes.
Yes.
Because he can hear it when he's putting it on the tape machine and he's cutting. That's a really big bonus.
See, this is what I was talking about earlier, Ben, that you guys are taking the extra steps for the most care for the final product.
Yeah. We do that whenever we can. Now, oftentimes, some labels won't give you those tapes. A lot of labels just don't even have them. But we've got our own mastering and cutting house in Detroit now. So we've got Third Man Mastering up there, which is connected to our storefront. It's connected to our pressing plant. And most labels that you deal with will just want to give you digital files when you're licensing a title from them for reissue. And so what our guys have started to do was take those digital files and transfer them to tape and then cut from that tape so that you're still throwing analog in there somewhere.
Right.
To try and get the beneficial markers and characteristics of the format. Because people love asking you, did you cut this from tape? Did you have the original masters? What was your source material? It's like, imagine like the worst of Civil War reenactors just under the guise of audio files. After a certain point, like, you just hate music, don't you? You just want to find someone tripping up. You want to call someone out. Like, it seems like it's oftentimes focused on the negative, where you can make a great record sourced from digital material. It wouldn't be my first choice, but I also wouldn't inherently shit on one done from that starting point.
Look, we'd rather have the record than not have it.
Absolutely.
Right? That's what it comes down to. This is great music that needs to be heard.
Yes.
To that end, Ben, a question that I've wondered and that I've heard a number of fans of the label ask is, how are all of these projects dreamed up, man? I mean, some of these are some very obscure records that are then packaged in glorious ways. Could you illuminate that process for us?
Yeah, I think the benefit is that the variety of folks that are working on those projects are first and foremost music fans.
Yeah.
And so you have people who, like myself, for example, but I would say this about anyone else at Third Man, who listen to music and love music in their free time, in their spare time. They buy records and they collect records as something they do for the enjoyment of it. It's not solely their job, their punch the clock, their 9 to 5. And the fact that those things can overlap, that's how you can find these interesting moments and these things that are possibly overlooked by someone who's just, yeah, man, I just put out records. Some people, it's just a job, and that's okay. There needs to be labels like that. But right. That's just not us. I guess a good example I would use is there was a record, this obscure Michigan, I would say for simplification purposes, garage single.
Okay.
By a guy named Jack Wood. And was self-released in like 1966, I believe. It's called Born to Wander. And I had been looking for an original copy of this record for 6-7 years. And it would show up on eBay. And I just always was like the second highest bidder. And, when I thought maybe it was $100 record and it'd go for like $150. Or I'd think, okay, I'll spend $200 and it goes for $275. Like 4 or 5 times that happened. And I just kept on getting outbid and I was pissed off. So one day I just decided to just type the name in, Jack Wood, Born to Wander. I'm doing this totally on my own personal interest. And I find that Jack Wood has set up a website and he's actually repressed this record
Oh, wow.
And you can buy it from his website. For $10, he'll autograph the label for you. So I buy a copy and I say, hey, send an email from my work email address and just say, hey, man, super stoked to get this. Wondering if you've ever thought about reissuing it with someone else. Because I think the reissue that he had undertaken was fairly recent at that point and just available to whoever was Google searching for his name in this record. Like you wouldn't find it in a record store or distributor or anything like that.
Right. And like, I'm a deep music nerd. I don't know this guy's name.
Yeah. No, he did one single and that was it. Yeah. And he knew the Third Man name. So that kind of opens the doors. And he had said, I was thinking about it. And maybe someone else had reached out to him right around the same time. But he said, well, I think Third Man is the place for it. And so we work with him. We put together sleeve art. We get, I think we just master from an original clean copy of the record. And I think I sourced the clean copy. So I had to talk to all my record collector friends. So there wasn't tape. At the time, there wasn't the tape. Subsequently, Jack seems to have found the original master tape. But we had such a clean copy. By the time he turned it up, I said, I think we're fine on what we've put out there already. But yeah, so my underground network of super deep Michigan record collectors, I call up my guy Carl. I'm like, hey, Carl, do you have a copy of Jack Wood, a clean one? He's like, yeah, it's like, mint minus. Like, okay, just tell me the price. I need it. We're reissuing it. And so buy that from him, use that as our source material. And it kind of gets a life of its own. Outside of any of our involvement, it got licensed for a really massive Bacardi rum ad campaign, like worldwide. Wow. He's made insane amount of money on that.
But it wasn't through your licensing department?
No, it was totally separate.
Still, you guys gave it some juice. There's no doubt about that. Yeah,
just being connected with Third Man, we got it out there. And then we subsequently got further licenses for it in other realms.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and this guy is like, he's retired. He's like probably in his late 60s or early 70s now, and he's just tickled that this thing he did on a lark back in the 60s is now like, is paying his mortgage years and years later. Like we have to consistently send him royalty checks. And that all comes from my own personal quest of trying to find this record because I just liked the songs. And so that crosses over into my job here. And the lines blur. And I have this conversation with my wife oftentimes, which is, I got to go to work. And she teases me and is like, yeah, you have to go to work at your dream job. Which is true. This is my dream job. I could not imagine, unless someone would pay you just to sleep and do nothing, working at a record label. I would be happy working at any record label, like 100%.
It's a dream so few people get.
Yeah, I would be happy putting out polka music that I don't like. Just the process is what really, really intrigues me and engages me. So to be able to put out records like The Stooges and like this Jack Wood record or the White Stripes, like my favorite band, to be able to do that, I keep on waiting to wake up from the dream. And 11 years on, I'm still in this dream.
It really is a dream setup that you all have built there. I've been lucky enough to get a tour of the facility when I was down in Nashville. And it really does feel, and I've heard this comparison from other people, but it really does feel like being in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It's a sonic version of that. And, one of the rooms that was so cool is the Blue Room venue there, which has direct-to-acetate recording capability and where you guys have done some insane concerts. I mean, tell me how that part of the Third Man empire came together.
So we didn't start with that. That wasn't always here. We started with just a very simple, very basic live room, the Blue Room, stage, and we had it hooked up for recording to tape, which at the time we couldn't think of any venue that was equipped with a 2-inch tape machine to do live recordings from. So we were pretty stoked on that. And after a couple of years of working in that realm, the opportunity came up to expand. We bought the building next door to us. And in buying that building, we were afforded the opportunity to build onto the alley separating the two buildings. And so it came up, and I said, well, we could do a more dedicated recording suite, a studio aspect.
Have it right in-house.
Yeah. And so we talked again, George Ingram at Nashville Record Productions. It was kind of this conversation between he and Jack, where Jack said, well, if you bring a lathe over, I'll build a room for it. And George said, well, if you build the room, I'll bring the lathe over. And it was kind of this standoff. And Jack eventually just built the room, and George said, I didn't think you were going to build the room, but I'll hold up my end of the bargain. So he brought the lathe over. The lathe is a 1955 Scully lathe that came out of King Records in Cincinnati. King is like James Brown, Little Willie John, Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, all the Federal titles. Just a really, really important label in American musical history across many, many different artists and genres even. So once we got that hooked up, we then started recording direct to disc. And so recording direct to disc was out of vogue by approximately, I say like
50 years?
No, longer than that. Like I would say like maybe the mid to late 50s. The transfer over to tape had already started. When Elvis went to record his first recordings for his mom, so to speak, it's not actually how it happened, but his first recordings were on direct to disc. And by the time he's recording his final singles for Son, like 2 years later, he's recording to tape.
Parenthetically, you guys have that very first Elvis straight to disc because I've seen it. I have pressed my nose against the glass and drooled a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, we do.
Right there in the third man offices.
We do have it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're talking about a process that has been not widely used or not in vogue for, at that point, 60 years or so? And it requires an artist to approach their art differently. Mm-hmm. So most people just go on, they play their show, and that's it. Recording live to disc, you have to give these bands and these artists, you have to tell them, all right, here's how we do it. You get on stage and you need to record a test song. We need to make sure all of our levels are okay. And if everything is good for the engineer at the front of the house and it's good for the cutting engineers in the back of the house and your monitors at the side of the stage, then we do the real recording. So, it's like movie magic. You got the applause sign and you're stitching everything together so that it's going to work for the final end product.
You got a team behind the scenes.
Yeah, so the band has to record a side at a time. So that's 20 minutes per side. And so in that 20 minutes, there's no editing, there's no overdubs, there's no redos, there's no starting and stopping. Whatever happens on that 20 minutes is what ends up on your finished record. So that includes if you burp into the microphone, if you have to tune your guitar, if you knock over your bass drum.
Right.
All of that is there. Think of it as, trapeze without a net. There's nothing to save you after the fact.
And somehow, Ben, despite the fact that there is no net, artists go wild for this approach, man. You guys have had so many cool people come through. I'm thinking everyone from Mdou Mokhtar to Father John Misty to Billie Eilish. People who are not recording this way normally are so amped to have the opportunity.
Yeah, we did Melvins, Mudhoney, Pearl Jam.
I don't think you two made it past the record booth in the store, did they? All the way to the Blue Room?
Well, what we did was, I'm so glad you asked. We did record U2 direct to disc, but they weren't set up in the Blue Room. They were set up in our storefront. We just had to run the cables a little further. They recorded direct to disc. It was supposed to be a 7-inch. And then the idea just kind of got scuttled. But we did record it and we did, test pressings. But yeah, it ended up not coming out. So when you talk about U2, you talk about Pearl Jam, you talk about Melvins, Mudhoney, we're talking about bands that have been together for, I think, each of them 30 years or more.
Yeah. Longer than Billie Eilish has been alive.
Absolutely. So I think the appeal to them is all of those bands have done multiple live records. And they've done just about everything. But they hadn't done that. That's the appeal. Well, shit, we've been a band for 3 decades. We've never recorded direct to disc. Let's go do it. And then you also have people like, for example, Billie Eilish, who sees all those other artists that we've recorded in that manner. And, she's building a legacy at this point. She's beyond like trying to establish herself. She's established. She wants to do what the greats have done or are doing. Mm-hmm. And that's it. So we were even surprised that the Billie Eilish thing happened. That kind of seemed like unbelievable.
It was amazing. And it came out so well.
Yeah, and quickly too. That's the other thing too, is that from recording to release, I think it was just a little over 4 weeks. So we rushed that sucker out, and it was only available in our storefronts. So you could only buy it physically in Nashville and Detroit, which is pretty cool to have the biggest artist arguably in the world at that point put out a record available in 2 stores.
I love it.
So they got it. She got it, and her team got it, which in those situations, the biggest barrier is people not getting it. But when they get it, it's kind of an open door.
I was very lucky to have the opportunity to do a direct-to-disc at Third Man Records. And I sang my daughter's favorite lullaby and bought her the Third Man record player. And now she has her dad singing live from Third Man.
You're making me cry.
I feel in touch with the legends.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Did you did it in the recording booth?
I did it in the recording booth, which for those listening is a maybe 100-year-old booth, Ben?
Slow down, Lumiere. It's 1947.
Okay.
It's a 1947
Excuse
voiceograph.
me, a 73-year-old booth. Still older than Billie Eilish.
I don't know too many 73-year-old people that would take kindly to being mistaken for being 100. But the sentiment is there. No, so it's a 1947 voiceograph recording booth. These used to be at like the observation deck of the Empire State Building or the Atlantic City Boardwalk. They sent them to military bases during World War II. Basically, you go in, you put your money in, and you get 90 seconds to record a message. And that message is etched into a one-of-a-kind polycarbonate disc that you can then take to your home record player and play back. Back in the day, it was used like, hey, I'm at the Atlantic City Boardwalk. Hope you don't die of dysentery, that kind of thing. But nowadays, the cool thing about the booth that we have, so when we set up that booth, it was the first one available to the public in probably at least 25 years, maybe even 30 at that point.
Amazing.
We had known that these booths had existed, and Jack had this thought of like, man, I would love to get one. And he said, I always just expected I was going to be on tour somewhere, like in Romania, and I'd find one of these in a cafe.
Right.
And it just never happened. But we finally ended up chancing upon the opportunity to get some. We found 3 different booths and bought them all. And in the process of kind of, one was better suited than the rest and put tons of effort in getting it up and running. Tons of money, tons of time, hours, sweat, and all that stuff. After a certain point, Jack had just said, well, we're never going to make our money back on this. Like this, he's like, but I don't care. He said, this is just something beautiful. It's romantic. It needs to exist. And I'm fine having spent, tens of thousands of dollars making that happen. I'm okay
And you're
with
also
that.
only charging, I think, $20 a pop, right? I mean, it's cheap to use.
I like telling this story because it speaks to the deeper purpose and mindset of Third Man. Let's just make it. Let's not worry what we're going to spend. It just needs to exist. That was Jack's directive.
Oh, love it.
So the first day that we had the booth open, basically unannounced, Neil Young shows up and says, hey, can I record a song in there?
What?
And so we're looking at each other like, wow, that's a pretty good sign. Neil Young showed up and he recorded a song, high-fiving and it took a lot to just even get to that point. And Neil shows up. Awesome. And then maybe 3 months later, Neil got a hold of Jack and said, hey, I want to do my whole new album recorded in your record booth. And that's an even further thought of like, wow, we're doing something right. So we took it out of the store, we put it in the Blue Room, and Neil was in there with Jack recording for like 3 days.
And this is a telephone booth size
absolutely
setup. For those who haven't seen it, literally a telephone
arguably
booth, right?
maybe even smaller than a telephone booth. Like you
can't hold the guitar sideways. You'd have to hold it upwards.
Yeah, you have to hold it like you got to wiggle yourself in there. It helps to keep the door open partially.
Neil's a svelte man.
But Neil's idea was that it was all cover songs of songs that he learned when he was becoming a songwriter.
Oh,
so it was
magical.
Bob Dylan, Willie Nelson, Bert Jansch. And so he records it. One of my favorite Third Man memories is being at the desk I'm sitting at right now, which is maybe about 30 or 40 feet from the Blue Room. It's the end of a day, and my door is open, and I'm working on some emails, and I hear in the distance, Neil Young singing Bob Dylan, Blowing in the Wind.
Wow.
I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm hearing Neil Young singing Blowing in the Wind. And what I'm hearing right now is not a recording. It's not playback. What I'm hearing is emanating from Neil Young's chest. Like this is his lungs pumping it out.
You're giving me shivers.
So I said, these emails. I'm just going to sit and listen to Neil Young sing for the rest of the day. It's 4:30. I'm just going to listen to Neil Young. I don't think anyone was mad at me for that. When it comes time for the record to be released, promotionally, we have this awesome opportunity where actually Neil is scheduled to play on The Tonight Show. And we got our engineers to take the booth up to New York and set up the booth on the stage at The Tonight Show. And he performs in the booth. And that's not even the coolest part. The coolest part is that the station brass or whoever had the ability to make the call, they ran the audio from the disc that they recorded, not the studio audio, not all their super high-res mics. So what they ran,
Wow.
Neil Young, it sounded like 1947, poppy, tinny, one microphone, no EQ recording. That's what they broadcast out to millions of people. So we're already thinking, that's amazing. Neil Young, as part of his record deal, he gets a budget for his recording studios for every album that he does. Well, what was the recording studio for this record? It was this little phone booth.
Yeah.
So we were able to, take some of that and put that towards the cost that we had sunk into it. It wasn't, it didn't pay off everything. It was like, wow, that's a kind of nice little boon. And from there, what we hadn't anticipated was after it was on the Tonight Show and the story of this booth kind of went out there, we started getting people come in almost immediately. I want to record in the booth Neil Young recorded in.
Wow.
Almost every day, to the point where we've had over 4,000 recordings done in that booth since 7 years.
That's incredible.
More than doubling our initial investment into the project and into making it work. And that's kind of this great thing that we keep in the back of our heads at Third Man, which is sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you need to just throw caution to the wind and make something happen and not be worried about every last penny and saying, we spent too much money already. Let's just, let's cut our losses. You can't do it all the time. You need to be judicious in when you apply it. But in that situation, our not being concerned with every last nickel spent on the booth, I think ultimately enabled us to make it more profitable than it ever could have been.
And millions of people have heard it. That is just a wonderful metaphor for everything you guys do there. And Ben, as a fan of Third Man, thank you so much for throwing caution to the wind for these years, man. I just can never wait to see what you guys do next. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show. And really, man, for all your work as a historian, as a conservator, and for shining a light on so much great music that would otherwise be lost. Really appreciate you deeply, man.
Man, it's been fun chopping it up with you.
Let's do it again sometime.
Yes.
Till next time.
Awesome.
Peace. Thanks so much for listening to this very special episode of Talkhouse and McIntosh's For the Love of Music podcast series. Check out our debut episode featuring longtime Grateful Dead engineer and Furman Electronics founder, Janet Furman. And make sure to catch future episodes of the series to hear conversations with James Murphy, Too Many DJs, and more. Visit McIntoshlabs.com to check out the very best amplifiers, preamplifiers, receivers, speakers, and turntables being made by hand in Binghamton, New York. Our producers for this series are Ian Wheeler and Mark Yoshizumi. Ben Blackwell recorded himself at his Third Man Records office in Nashville. Our researcher is Reese Higgins. Till next time, I'm Elia Einhorn. Peace.